Hello and welcome to Indus News. Live from Islamabad, I'm Naila Shuja and these are the headlines. The United States says it will not undertake a hasty pullout of troops from Afghanistan that puts NATO forces at risk. Addressing a news conference at Pentagon, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said more progress is needed in Afghan peace talks before Western forces withdraw. He urged all parties to decrease violence and choose the path towards peace. Meanwhile, 5 people have been killed and 2 others wounded in 3 explosions that rocked Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Police say a woman is among those killed in the attacks. Magnetic IED blast attacks have alarmingly increased in Kabul in recent months. In Myanmar, 2 protesters have been killed and 6 others wounded as security forces opened fire to disperse anti-coup march in Malande. The latest shooting comes after a 20-year-old girl died on Friday after being shot in the head last week. The protesters are demanding immediate release of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and the restoration of democracy. A Russian court has rejected Alexei Navalny's appeal against his jailing for violating the terms of a suspended sentence. However, the court shortened the Kremlin critic's jail term by 6 weeks. Navalny's lawyer termed the verdict unlawful, adding that they will file an appeal. Brazil has registered over 1,300 more COVID-19 deaths, with its toll crossing 244,000. Meanwhile, the United States says its landed borders with Canada and Mexico will remain closed until March 21st to control the pandemic spread. Pakistan has registered over 1,300 new cases and 36 deaths overnight, taking the toll over 12,563. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected more than 110 million people. In tennis, Naomi Osaka beats Jennifer Brady 6-4, 6-3 to win her second Australian Open title. The former world number 1 clinched 6 straight games to take the first set and storm to a 4-0 lead in the second. Osaka's victory over the 22nd seeded American gave the Japanese her 4th major crown. And men's single top seed Novak Djokovic will face Daniil Medvedev for the Grand Slam title on Sunday. In cricket, the Pakistan Super League is all set to woo fans with its 6th edition kicking off today. National Stadium Karachi will host the first match between the reigning champions Karachi Kings and the Quetta Gladiators. The Kings are aiming to retain their crown under their new head coach, Herschel Gibbs. For more news and details, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back. The United States says it will not undertake a hasty pullout of troops from Afghanistan that puts NATO forces at risk. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says more progress is needed in Afghan peace talks before Western forces withdraw. Addressing a news conference at the Pentagon, Austin said that the United States is mindful of the looming deadlines but wants to do this methodically and deliberately. He added Washington is committed to a responsible and sustainable end to the Afghan war.
I urge all parties to choose the path towards peace. And the violence must decrease now. I told our allies that no matter what the outcome of our review, the United States will not undertake a hasty or disorderly withdrawal from Afghanistan that puts their forces or the alliance's reputation at risk. At this time, no decisions about our future force posture have been made.
This comes a day after Austin discussed Afghanistan with NATO defense ministers in Brussels. Now moving on, 5 people have been killed and 2 others wounded in 3 explosions that rocked Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. Police say a woman is among those killed in the attacks. Security forces say the first explosion targeted a civilian vehicle in the west of Kabul, in which 2 people were wounded. They said that the second explosion claimed 3 lives in the Karte Parvan area of the capital, while 2 people were killed in the PULLOUT area. However, no group has claimed responsibility for the attacks so far. Magnetic IED blast attacks have alarmingly increased in the capital in recent months. More than 50 people have been killed and 70 more wounded in the Kabul attacks during the past 30 days. China's army has honored 2 military officers and 3 soldiers for defending the country's western border. The military also shared a video showing Indian forces trespassing Ladakh River while Chinese troops attempt to stop them. More in this report.
Galwan Valley border clash in June last year left 20 Indian soldiers dead, while 4 Chinese also lost their lives. The Indian military violated the previous consensus and trespassed the line of actual control and built tents. They attacked the Chinese soldiers by using steel tubes and cudgels and throwing stones. But the Indian military was utterly defeated, with many running away while leaving many injured and dead. Inspired by the spirit of those deceased compatriots, Chinese soldiers stationed on the front line intensified their efforts to defend the border.
The heroic deeds have greatly inspired the fighting will of the officers and soldiers. Now it is the coldest time of the year, but we are in high spirit to defend our country's border. We would rather die here than losing an inch of our land.
China says new equipment has been deployed to the frontier stations and logistic supplies have also been updated for soldiers stationed along the border areas.
An Indian court has extended the detention of climate activist Disha Ravi over a guide for anti-government farmers' protest. Ravi has been charged with sedition for creating protest toolkit. Ravi's arrest has raised concerns about a crackdown on dissent and prompted other climate activists to raise a voice. Swedish climate campaigner Greta Thunberg has tweeted her support for Ravi. Taking to Twitter, she wrote, "Freedom of speech are non-negotiable human rights." Meanwhile, another farmer has passed away during the protest at the Delhi border due to a heart attack. According to the Farmers Union, this has pushed the total number of farmers' deaths to 208. Human Rights Watch says Indian government policies and actions discriminate against Muslims and stigmatize its critics. The international rights body said the prejudices of the ruling BJP has infiltrated independent institutions. The group said that the police and the courts empower nationalist groups to threaten, harass, and attack religious minorities with impunity. In a statement, it said February 23rd will mark the first anniversary of the communal violence in Delhi that killed 53 people, including 40 Muslims. The rights body said instead of conducting a credible probe, the authorities have targeted activists and protest organizers. It added that this time the government has responded to farmers' mass demonstrations by vilifying minority Sikh protesters. Director Meenakshi Ganguly said that the Indian government is providing political patronage and cover to the bigotry. The United States says it will not bow to Iran's pressure before talks on returning to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. White House says Washington does not need to take additional administrative steps to participate in revival talks. More in this report.
Talking to reporters, White House spokesperson Jen Psaki said the EU has invited the U.S. for talks over the JCPOA. But she added it is simply an invitation to have a diplomatic conversation. Psaki said the U.S. has no plan to withdraw so-called snapback sanctions against Iran. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Iran is much closer to being able to produce a nuclear weapon. In an interview, he said the policy of so-called maximum pressure of previous U.S. administration against Iran has not produced results. Meanwhile, diplomats said the UN nuclear watchdog has found uranium particles at 2 Iranian sites it inspected after months of stonewalling. They said the watchdog is preparing to rebuke Tehran for failing to explain this to the agency.
In Myanmar, a protester has been killed and 6 others wounded as security forces opened fire to disperse anti-coup march in Mandalay. The protesters are demanding immediate release of elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi and the restoration of democracy. The latest shooting comes a day after a 20-year-old girl died after being shot in the head last week. The United States has condemned her death and urged the ruling military to refrain from using force against demonstrators. Hundreds of protesters have so far been arrested while the internet services remain suspended in Myanmar. Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha and 9 ministers have survived a no-confidence motion in the parliament. The vote marks the second no-confidence test Prayut's government has faced since taking office in July 2019. The president of the National Assembly, Chuan Lipai, announced that the widely expected results. Chuan said that 272 to 206 vote with 3 abstentions showed that there is confidence in Prayut. The censure motion required a simple majority comprising 244 votes to pass.
The number of those who doesn't agree to vote for no confidence is 272. 3 abstained from voting. In conclusion, the vote of those who doesn't agree is more than the required number of the total MPs. Therefore, the vote shows that there is confidence.
Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the parliament in anticipation of the vote with more demonstrations planned ahead. Now moving on, a Russian court has rejected Alexei Navalny's appeal against his jailing for violating the terms of a suspended sentence. But the court has shortened his 3.5-year jail term by 6 weeks. The Kremlin critic was jailed earlier this month for parole violations, which he says were politically motivated. His lawyer has termed the court's verdict unlawful, saying they will file an appeal. Navalny is due to appear in court again later today to face a separate ongoing slander trial against him. Western countries have condemned the case and are discussing possible sanctions on Russia. Saudi Arabia has announced to invest more than $20 billion in its domestic military industry over the next decade. In a press briefing, defense industry regulator head Ahmed bin Abdul Aziz Al Ohali said $10 billion will be spent on research and development. The move is part of Riyadh's aim to manufacture more weapons and military systems domestically. He said for this purpose, Saudi Arabia will spend 50% of its military budget locally by 2030. The United Nations says Palestinian socioeconomic development has suffered one of its worst years since 1994. Office of UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process said almost half of the Palestinian population requires humanitarian aid. In a report, it said that the protracted humanitarian crisis in the country has been exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. The office described 2020 as a year of setbacks for Palestinians, their institutions, and economy due to the pandemic. It said vaccines have begun arriving in the occupied Palestinian territory through the efforts of the WHO and UNICEF. The United Nations says Libya National Army agrees to commit and facilitate the national elections on the 24th of December 2021. UN Special Envoy for Libya, Jens Kubis, met with a commander of the eastern-based army, General Khalifa Haftar, in Benghazi. In a statement, UN mission to Libya said the meeting is part of Kubis' first visit to the country, where he met with officials and interlocutors. He said that the envoy and Haftar discussed ways to expedite the full implementation of a ceasefire signed on the 23rd of October last year. Kubis reiterated that the urgent need to cease all international interference in Libya. He stressed all countries must respect the United Nations Security Council resolutions. The meeting took place in the presence of Libya's 5+5 Joint Military Commission delegation. In Spain, protests over the jailing of a rapper for glorifying terrorism and insulting royalty have entered a 4th night. Protesters attacked 2 banks, smashing the windows in Barcelona. Police have also charged protesters in the northern Catalan city of Granada. Earlier, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez condemned the violence. Pablo Hasél, known for his fiercely anti-establishment raps, has been sentenced to 9 months in prison. The incident has galvanized a debate over freedom of expression in Spain. It's now time for a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Brazil has registered over 1,300 more COVID-19 deaths, with its toll crossing 244,000. The United States says its land borders with Canada and Mexico will remain closed until the March 21st to control the pandemic spread. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.4 million lives and infected more than 110 million people so far. More on the coronavirus in this report.
Ravaging cases, hindering curbs, political scandals, and extreme weather are affecting the nation's respective fights against the virus. Canada's largest city, Toronto, has extended the curbs until at least 8 March, despite schools only just starting up again. Argentina's health minister has resigned following reports that people had been able to use connections to get access to vaccines to which they were not entitled. In the United States, about 6 million vaccines have been temporarily delayed due to the frigid weather. However, President Joe Biden expressed hope the vaccination drive in the U.S. can be concluded by July.
So we will have ordered, much of which will have been distributed, over 600 million doses by the end of July. July 29th is the expected date. But that could change. Look what's happening with the weather now, for example. It's slowing up the distribution right now. But I believe we'll be approaching normalcy by the end of this year, and God willing, this Christmas will be different than last.
In Europe, Italy is investigating fake vaccines after regional officials received an offer to buy 27 million doses outside of the EU procurement system. Greece has extended lockdown restrictions to more areas of the country to stem the spread of the infection. The Dutch senators have approved a law underpinning the country's curfew until at least early March, despite the court orders to lift curbs. Meanwhile, philanthropist Bill Gates said a politically sensitive gap between vaccinating people in wealthy and developing countries could narrow to half a year. Gates also urged the world for universal efforts against any future such crisis.
So the tools, the R&D side needs to be funded, and the field capacity, the factories, the surveillance, that team of 3,000. But these investments will have fantastic returns even when there's not a pandemic. And, I have very little doubt that, given what a tragedy this has been this time around, over the next 5 years, we'll get those things in place.
In Central Africa, 2 people have died as protests against new COVID-19 restrictions in Gabon degenerated into a standoff in 2 major cities.
While in Pakistan, 36 people have died of COVID-19 and more than 1,300 tested positive for the virus overnight. The health ministry says that the nationwide death toll has reached 12,563. It said nearly 570,000 people contracted the virus so far, out of which over 533,000 have recovered. The ministry said at present there are more than 24,000 active cases in Pakistan. It added over 2,000 patients are admitted in the hospitals across the country. Pakistan Navy has conducted joint exercises with the Russian and Sri Lankan Navy forces, which mark the end of Aman 21 drill. Pakistan's Navy spokesperson says that the drills have been held in the North Arabian Sea. The aerial assets of the Pakistan Navy and Air Force participated in the exercise. Navy says that the drills were conducted to further enhance cooperation and interoperability with the fleets of Russia and Sri Lanka. Earlier, Naval Chief Admiral Mohammad Amjad Khan Niazi visited the ships of Russia, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. The admiral met with the commanding officers and the crew of the foreign aircraft participating in the exercise. Dr. ZUBAIDA Sarang, an eye surgeon from Chitral, has become the first Pakistani doctor to make it to the Book Authority list. Her book has been included in the list of best ophthalmology ebooks of all time in 2020 and the best optics books of all time this year. The book titled Optics Made Easy, The Last Review of Clinical Optics, has also been one of the 3 bestsellers on Amazon. The book, which is being hailed as a breakthrough in the world of optics, is written for ophthalmology students as a last-minute revision tool. Dr. ZUBAIDA hails from Yarkhan area of Chitral and holds an MBBS from the Aga Khan University, Karachi. She is with us. Let's wait and watch what she has to say about her achievements. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. ZUBAIDA. Now, your book has previously been a part of the 3 bestsellers on Amazon, and now it has been added to the list of best ophthalmology ebooks of all time in 2020. What's your say on this?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me in your show. And secondly, I feel honored and I feel humbled because when I wrote this book, I had never expected to be one of the bestsellers or to create this much of hype. So I really feel blessed, and I think it's a huge blessing of Allah.
Now, the book is also being described as a last-minute revision tool for ophthalmology students. How will it help them?
So basically, optics is considered to be a complicated subject. It's a branch of physics, so it's a little hard to understand. So what I have done is I have tried to make it easier by using some easy tools and mnemonics and some diagrams. So that's why I have named it as Optics Made Easy. So it's going to be helpful for the exams and to understand optics in an easier way.
Now, you've become a source of inspiration for the people, especially women in your hometown of Chitral. What would you like to say to them?
I would tell them to erase the word impossible from their dictionary, to have higher aims in their life, to work hard to achieve them. And when you have higher aims and higher goals in your life, then your subconscious mind works towards that, and there's nothing impossible in this world.
Dr. ZUBAIDA, thank you so much for joining us. Now, NASA's Mars Perseverance rover has sent the first ever colored images of the red planet. Scientists have shared 3 images which are showing the rover's descent, its wheel on the planet, and the surface of Mars. More about the red planet in this report.
The rover Perseverance is the most advanced astrobiology lab ever sent to another world. It has transmitted the first ever colored images of Mars. The high-resolution images provided by the rover have offered scientists a more detailed look at the Martian rocks, unlikely anything they have ever seen before. Perseverance Deputy Project Scientist Katie Stack-Morgan says that the big question for scientists is whether these are sedimentary or volcanic rocks. The information of the rocks on Mars' surface might open up new avenues of research on traces of ancient microbial life on the red planet.
Geologic time on Mars is still very relative, and that's something we'd like to really nail down. And so volcanic rocks are really great to get absolute age dates from. So if these are volcanic rocks, we are incredibly excited about that from a Mars sample return perspective, because we can really nail that age date with a sample from a volcanic rock.
Engineers report Perseverance to be in good health as they gradually commission its systems.
I'm happy to say that the rover is doing great and is healthy on the surface of Mars and continues to be highly functional and awesome, and I'm exhilarated.
The robotic vehicle sailed through space for nearly 7 months, covering 293 million miles before piercing the Martian atmosphere.
The World Bank is saying it is working with the IMF on ways to factor climate change into the talks to reduce debt burdens of poor countries. World Bank President David Malpass says that the creditors are studying how to twin global problems: the need to reduce or restructure the debt burden and the need to decrease fossil fuel emissions. Ethiopia, Chad, and Zambia have already initiated talks with creditors under a new common framework supported by the G20. In an interview, Malpass said he expects additional countries to request a restructuring of their debts. He said that the poor countries are not really emitting very much in terms of greenhouse gases, but they added that the bearing of brunt of the impact from the rest of the world. China has registered an online retail sales volume of around $139 billion over the past 30 days. The remarkable online consumptions made China's Spring Festival market flourish. A 30-day shopping festival launched by the Ministry of Commerce concluded with a total online retail sales of over $139 billion. According to the ministry's data, online sales of catering industries obtained a 48.5% growth year-on-year, while sales related to Lunar New Year's Eve dinner jumped by nearly 79%. Moviegoers also contributed more than $1.39 billion through online booking. It's now time to take a look at the weather around the world. For the latest news updates, you can follow us on our social media at Indus.News.